In this chapter, we're going to explore the surprisingly deep relationship between large organizations, we're talking businesses, governments, nonprofits, and the world of so-called free open source software. Now, you might think of it as a world run by volunteers, but it's actually a really complex ecosystem of economics, strategy, and a whole lot of unwritten rules. So let's dig in and unpack it together. Okay, so let's just start with the big central question that seems like a paradox at first glance. We all have this image of open source, as a passion project built by hobbyists in their spare time. But the truth is, most of the code that powers the biggest projects is written by developers who are collecting a paycheck. So how does that even work? Why would a for-profit company pay someone to write code just to give it away? This question, right here, is really the key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about.
Well, to answer that, we have to start with the economics. And even though free software might sound like a terrible business plan, the financial logic behind it is actually surprisingly simple. It really all comes down to one core idea: sharing the burden.
Let's use an analogy here to make this crystal clear. Think about the web server that runs a company's website, or the operating system on all its computers. This stuff is essential digital infrastructure. Now, a company wouldn't go out and build its own private highway system just to ship its products, right? Of course not. They use the public roads. Well, in the very same way, it just doesn't make any financial sense for every single company to build its own web server software from the ground up when it's something they all need.
This slide really lays out the economic choice perfectly. On one side, you've got the old-school proprietary model. One company has to shoulder 100% of the development, the maintenance, the bug fixes, all of it, and that is incredibly expensive. But on the other side, with open source, all the different companies that need that software can just pool their resources. They share the cost of development, and everybody gets a better, more secure product in the end. The key thing to remember here is this isn't about charity, it's just smart collective investment.
Okay, so if it's such a smart investment, what are some of the specific strategies behind it? Because beyond just simple cost sharing, organizations have a whole range of really powerful reasons for putting their money and people into open source projects. The first, and by far the most common motivation, is the one we've just been talking about: sharing the burden. You will see direct, for-profit competitors collaborating on the very same open source project. And you might wonder, why would they do that? Well, it's simple math. The cost of building it together is just so much lower than the cost of each of them building it alone, or having to buy a super expensive proprietary alternative. But the reasons aren't always so friendly and collaborative. Sometimes they can be a lot more aggressive. Open source can actually be used as a pretty serious competitive weapon. So imagine your main rival sells a really profitable piece of software. Well, you could strategically fund or contribute to a free open source alternative. This starts to eat away at their market share, it weakens them financially, and all the while, you're building goodwill in the community. It's a sharp strategic move, and we see it happen all the time. Another common strategy is something called proprietary relicensing, though you'll often hear it called the open core model. The idea is a company offers a basic version of its software as open source, which gets a ton of people to use it. But then they sell an enhanced version with more features and support under a traditional proprietary license. MySQL is a classic example of this. Now, this model can be pretty controversial. Some people in the community feel it goes against the whole spirit of open source, kind of creating a freemium model where the really good stuff is always behind a paywall. But love it or hate it, it's a very common way that a lot of open source development gets funded. So, if a company decides to get involved, how do they actually influence where a project goes? Well, it's not as simple as just writing a check. Open source communities are true meritocracies. They have their own unwritten rules of engagement, and if you don't understand them, you're not going to get very far. This quote right here gets to the absolute heart of the matter. In a typical business deal, money buys results. But in open source, it just doesn't work that way. You can't pay a project to add a feature you want. Instead, you use your money to hire talented developers. And it's those developers who then have to earn their influence inside the community by doing good work. So this is the process. This is how it really works. An organization uses its money to hire great developers. But then, those developers have to show up and participate. They have to submit high-quality code, they have to help out in discussions, they have to review other people's work all out in the open. And over time, by consistently making valuable contributions, they earn respect, they earn credibility, and that credibility is what eventually turns into influence. It's a true meritocracy.
Here is a perfect real-world example of this principle in action. A company called CollabNet was the main corporate sponsor of the Subversion project. Now, when they hired a new developer, they could have just immediately given him what's called commit access. That's basically the keys to the kingdom, the ability to make changes directly to the project's code. But, and this is the important part, they didn't. Instead, that new paid developer had to go through the exact same public process as any unpaid volunteer. He had to submit his work for public review and earn that trust. It sent a really powerful message that the rules apply to everyone. You have to earn credibility. You can't just buy it. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about businesses, but what about a very different kind of organization? Government. While corporations have pretty much figured out how to navigate these waters, government agencies face a whole unique set of challenges when they try to participate in open source. You see, government agencies operate under a totally different set of pressures. For one, they are extremely risk-averse because any little mistake can blow up into a huge political scandal. And that clashes directly with the open source way of doing things, where development is public and messy and iterative. It means mistakes are going to happen out in the open. When you add in complicated purchasing rules and a culture of carefully managed press releases, you can see why the transparent, sometimes chaotic world of open source can be a really tough place for government to operate. So this leads to the single most important piece of advice for any government project. You have to be open from day one. If a project is built behind closed doors and then suddenly released in a big reveal, it creates this thing called an exposure event. The media and the public scrutinize every little detail all at once, just looking for flaws. But if the project is open from the very start, the whole process of making and fixing mistakes just becomes a normal, expected part of development. It happens transparently, and that dramatically lowers the political risk. Okay, so let's pull all of these threads together into a final section on best practices. Now, this is great advice for any organization. But for you, I want you to think of this as a kind of checklist you can use to evaluate a potential employer and how they behave in the open source world. This table really distills everything down into a clear set of do's and don'ts. And if you look closely, you'll see a pattern. Good open source citizens are transparent. They hire for the long term to build that credibility we talked about. And look at this third do, letting developers act as individuals. This is so key. It means they empower their developers to build their own personal reputations instead of just being corporate mouthpieces. And on the don't side, it's the opposite. Don't expect special treatment, and don't let a marketing event dictate your engineering schedule. In short, it all comes down to respecting the process and playing by the community's rules. And this is a really critical point for your own careers. An open source developer's contributions are, for all intents and purposes, a public resume. Future employers can see not just your code, but your design discussions, how you collaborate, how you handle feedback. When you're looking for a job, this is your portfolio. Companies aren't just looking for your technical skills. They're looking for proof that you're a constructive, respectful team player. Ultimately, how an organization decides to participate in open source is a really powerful signal. It tells you a lot about them. It reveals their long-term technical strategy, their ability to collaborate, and their commitment to being a good citizen in the larger tech world. It's a true measure of a company's maturity and foresight. So as you move forward into your careers, I want you to keep this question in mind. By looking at how a company behaves in open source, do they contribute code back? Do they empower their developers? Do they play by the rules? You can learn a tremendous amount about their culture and what it would actually be like to work there. And now you have the tools to see it all clearly.